Welcome to Morning Talk Show. Today is my conversation with Bernardo Kastrup. Bernardo, as we get into in the video or in the interview, he is a scientist and he is a philosopher. He's been involved in tech. He's worked at CERN in Switzerland. So he is he's a top flight mind, and he has become possessed of the idea that that consciousness is much bigger and greater and more all-consuming, or more all that touches everything in a way that we haven't been giving it credit for. Whether you agree with him or not, I think this conversation is worth a listen, because we get into a lot of implications of that kind of thing, and I felt like it was a very human conversation. I felt like there was a lot of vulnerability from himself and myself that was kind of next level for the podcast. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I hope you like it too. Please like and subscribe, and on this one, leave some comments, like if you can. And if you're watching the YouTube video of this and not the audio, leave some comments, because I would love to discuss this with people. So anyway, here's my conversation with Bernardo Kastrup. Bernardo Kastrup, welcome to Morning Talk Show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So what I'm interested in getting into, you're one of those people that as soon as I started hearing you speak about your ideas and thoughts, things begin exploding in my head, almost to the point that when I'm watching videos of you, I have to pause you and write something down and that kind of thing. So there's something very compelling. And I'm interested in hopefully getting a sense of kind of the story of how it came to be, because I know your story is pretty interesting. And then maybe some kind of the ways in which your idealism kind of colors your everyday life and changes your everyday life. But first of all, can you give a quick pitch for those who haven't heard how it is that you view reality and consciousness?
We keep looking for an explanation for consciousness. In our culture, an explanation is a reduction. We try to explain consciousness in terms of something else. My position is consciousness is that in terms of which we explain everything else. But consciousness itself is the ground level of reality, not your consciousness alone, not my consciousness alone, but consciousness as a type, consciousness as a category is all there is. So I do acknowledge that there is a world out there beyond our personal minds, beyond our personal consciousness. But I think that world is constituted of mental processes, experiences in consciousness at a transpersonal level, which present themselves to us in the form that we call physicality. So for me, consciousness is all there is. Not your alone, not my alone, but as a category of existence, it's all there is. Everything else happens within it as patterns of excitation of it.
Right. Can you define the word transpersonal, just in case? I think I'm hoping my audience spans a gap between those who would know what the word transpersonal means and those who don't.
So personal would be your consciousness, my girlfriend's consciousness. Transpersonal is that which transcends the personal. So it's a consciousness that is not associated with an individual entity, but a consciousness that spans space at a transpersonal level. So a kind of mind at large whose mental processes simply present themselves to us according to the images we see on the screen of perception. The physical world is the extrinsic appearance, is what transpersonal thoughts and emotions look like when observed from our perspective.
Fair enough. Yeah. And that's really interesting, because when you first hear it, I don't know, I was raised in a pretty, in a Christian, conservative Christian culture. And so I think the first little inkling is to be offended. You know what I mean? I'm not, but you know what I mean? Just like, oh, you're just telling me that nothing is real, or people probably go down the postmodernist route when they hear what you're saying. So have you had people very offended?
Offended, I don't know, but I certainly have had bemused and confused people.
Yeah,
Look, I'm far from me to deny the concreteness, the palpability, the reality of the world out there. Things have weight, things have consistency, they endure whether we are looking at them or not. The world
yeah.
out there is very concrete, very solid. But what is concreteness, solidity, palpability? These are experiences in consciousness. So
Mm-hmm.
by saying that the world out there is made of consciousness, I'm actually giving validity to the reality, the concreteness of the world. The only thing I am denying is the way materialists define matter, which is as
Mm,
a completely abstract thing
right,
that if you give a list of numbers, you've said all there is to be said about it,
right,
irrespective of any qualities. It has no qualities. It's entirely abstract.
right.
You can't even really visualize it because
Yeah,
any visualization entails qualities. But if you try to visualize it, you can imagine it as a series of vague contours and silhouettes and
right,
some mathematical equations floating in the air.
right.
That's the world of matter, according to materialism.
Yeah.
And the qualities of concreteness, palpability, solidity, according to materialism, those qualities are generated inside our skull,
Mm,
created by our brain, and they only exist inside our heads. They don't exist out there. And what I'm
mm.
saying is that no, the world of qualities, of concreteness, palpability, solidity, it's really out there.
Yeah,
The concreteness is how it presents itself to us. And
right.
its character is mental because it's in the world of mentality that those real qualities exist, not
Yeah.
in the pure abstraction of materialism.
And at a more spiritual level, we're in some way connected to everything in the world. You know, everything, we have a stake in it. It almost feels to me like materialism is some kind of bizarro Buddhism or something, where people will, you know, like hold up a rock or put their hand on a tree and really try to divorce themselves from that tree in as complete a way as they possibly can. And then only then will the tree be real or something. So, I mean, I didn't think this before, but saying it that way, do you think there is any level of self-hatred in materialism, like reflected in that view, or is that too strong, too far?
I don't think there is self-hatred. I think there is certainly a nuanced, although not very subtle, attempt at protecting one's own ego and sense of meaning. And I think there is a in your face attempt to escape from fear and anxiety.
Mm,
Because you see, the biggest anxiety in the history of humanity has been fear for what you will experience after you die.
mm,
In Christian language, am I going to go to hell? Am I going to
mm,
suffer after I
yeah,
die? And this fear has been so dominant for 95% of human history that it has entirely determined how we live our lives.
mm,
Now,
yeah,
for 200 years, since more or less beginning, maybe even middle of the 19th century, we have found a way to exercise that demon, to completely control
mm,
that fear by saying, you will experience nothing after you die.
yeah,
All of your problems are coming to an end because there will be nobody there to suffer.
mm,
So, however bad your situation is, it will for sure, whether you want it or not, come to an end. And there is nothing to fear because there is no one to feel the fear after you're dead. I mean, this
right,
is a fantastic coup. It's a
yeah,
psychological coup of mega proportions.
right.
We exercised our biggest fear. So that's playing a role there.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I also wonder if there's a sense of um, oppressive obligation that comes with meaning, of duty that comes with truly being connected and being one with reality. That is, I mean, it is overwhelming. I definitely have sympathy. You know, like I've been thinking, kind of reflecting lately on how appealing the thought of being nothing is. Because if I'm nothing, okay, well, then I can just look around me, pick up the pieces, move on from here, do what presents itself. And there are healthy things that for some people, I feel like it's necessary, especially for those maybe conditioned with a lot of fear and a lot of false or a lot of uninternalized obligation through things like religion. I find those are the people who are the most likely to gaze up at the stars and say, isn't it wonderful how insignificant I am, and just revel in that. And I can relate to that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I guess, yeah, sorry.
Look, it does give you a moral free ticket, which can be very appealing at first, especially for formerly religious people. If you look at the most vocal neo-atheists, most vocal militant materialists, a surprising percentage, more than what you would expect to see given the normal distribution in the general population, a surprising percentage is made of former religious people. And it's almost like they are out to get vengeance on their former selves or something. It's pretty curious.
I think I actually think I've noticed that a ton actually, because I'm in some kind of netherworld between religious and non-religious, and my friend group spans the two. And I have found there's a lot of damaged people, but I also think they're taking a religious view, they're carrying it forward into their atheism as well. I don't find that any of them, like, a moral free pass might even be a strong way to put it, because I find they're often really moral. In fact, I find they were so disenchanted with moral failures within the church, and that's one of the reasons that they wanted to leave. I wasn't really.
I think, look, if you have a personality tendency or a character trait that makes you predisposed to dogmatism, it will be dogmatic one way or the other. So even if you kill one set of dogmas, you end up landing in another view, but also from a dogmatic perspective, and you see that a lot. The moral free pass, I think it's there. There is a book by a Nobel Prize winning writer from the Czech Republic called Milan Kundera. He wrote a book, was translated. No, he wrote that book in English or French, I forgot. But the English title is The Unbearable Lightness of Being. There was even a movie made in the 80s with Daniel Day-Lewis about it. The movie tells the story of the book, but it doesn't capture at all the philosophy of the book. Not at all.
Oh, that's a shame.
The philosophy of the book is, Kundera tries to explain how some people can live with so few commitments to any moral perspective, to any sense of responsibility, any investment, without any investment in anything that has endurance in time. So disattached from anything that could give us a relationship with eternity, that they float in thin air. And there is a certain freedom in that lightness of being. The price you pay is banality. Life becomes banal and meaningless. So that same lightness that sort of liberates from fear, anxiety, a sense of responsibility, it also sort of infects anything that could give you profound joy, profound connectedness, profound meaning. So you sort of free float. You go up in the air like a helium balloon, unanchored. And what happened is that for most people who are materialists but are not invested in promoting, defending, or creating materialism, that's a tragedy. It's a terrible trade-off. Most psychologists would tell you that it's better to suffer with meaning than to not suffer but have no meaning. That's the most unbearable state of being. And for most people, that's what they end up with. The average person on the street who is a materialist, because you eat that from your culture, you inherit that from your culture, they have to do with a profound sense of meaninglessness, which leads them to desperate attempts to fill in the gap, like buying stuff, consumerism, all kinds of isms. But the people who are promoting materialism have an egoic investment in that, and they find meaning. They find meaning through what psychologists call it's a compensating maneuver of the
Mm.
ego. When
Yeah.
you lose one source of meaning, there is some kind of fluid compensation
Yeah.
towards another source. And they get that by perceiving themselves as differentiated, as above the average person,
Mm.
because they are privy to knowledge that the others don't. And they are just dishing out some crumbs of that bread of
Right.
knowledge to the masses, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And they're on the
And they
front lines. They're
and
on the
they're on the
front
front
lines
lines.
of a battle, which is always, I mean, nobody suffers from meaninglessness on the front lines of a battle.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they find meaning in extinguishing meaning for everybody else, because there is a kind of differentiation in that. There is also there are many ways of for people to find meaning, contributing to something that's bigger than yourself.
Mm.
And some leading edge materialist scientists, typically they are not militants. Real scientists are too busy doing science in order to go and do militant things. The militants tend to not be scientists at all. They just pretend to be.
Mm.
But the people who are on the leading edge of that, they are not militants, but they are materialists. They find meaning because they are constructing the great work of science that will survive them. So despite this moral and meaning nihilism, they find some other
Yeah.
precarious, as it may be, a source of meaning for themselves and the elite around them.
Mm.
And then they try to convince the rest of the population that their view is right. But the
Right.
problem is, for the rest of the population, there is no alternative source of meaning.
Mm.
And then you have an escalating pandemic of depression,
Yeah.
ennui,
Meaninglessness.
and
Yeah.
meaninglessness. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it almost throws some more credibility on your theory that, and it's something I've noticed, that we really can't expunge meaning from our minds. We can be haunted by meaning, and we can push it down, or we can disguise it by sort of memorizing an ideological stance, even, because I feel like there are materialists within religions. Maybe I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, but I have known people whose faith was, I mean, this sounds so negative. I hate to do that, but the faith seems to be a set of memorized principles, and so they've got quote unquote meaning, and then but whatever way we get to materialism, meaning still happens in consciousness, because I kind of feel like it's just what consciousness does.
If you don't have a source of meaning, then there is no difference whether you will die when you're 95 or right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely no difference. So you might as well go right now. And many people actually do that. Look, I don't have the positions I have because I'm looking for meaning. That's not at all how it went about. I am committed to truth, whatever the price of the truth is. If we had good reasons to believe materialism is true,
Mm.
then I think we should bite that bullet and do the
Mm.
best we can under those circumstances, because
Mm.
what matters to me is what is true. Now, I don't think we have good reasons at all to think that materialism is true. I think it's perhaps the worst metaphysical position on the table today. Of everything that is vaguely plausible, materialism is the least
Mm.
of them. It's only the reigning worldview because it has accumulated so much momentum through cultural
Right.
habit that it's
Mm.
difficult to stop that train.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
having come, just to conclude,
Sure.
having
Yeah.
come to the position I have, because I think it's the one that we have most reason to adhere to, the most likely to be true, and that's the only reason why I have the position I have, because I think it's the most likely to be true. Having come there for these reasons, truthfulness, um, I realized that it takes from the table that insulation against anxiety that materialism gives you. Because if consciousness is eternal, that means your consciousness, maybe not as a human being, but the core subject within you is eternal. And that leads to what I like to call the words escape me, the vertigo of eternity.
Mm.
If you glimpse that, not only conceptually, but if you glimpse that with the core of your being, and it's like,
Yeah.
and then you jump out of that.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's the bad news. But at least it reinvests people, their lives, and their world and nature at large with meaning. At
Mm.
least that. And we know that if you have meaning, then you can bear anything,
Mm.
anything, if there is meaning to it.
Yeah. I think of children, and how when people have children, regardless of their thoughts on any of these deeper issues, they now know that something about their presence is going to extend at least another, you know, at least another few decades beyond the end of their life. And even that little bit, I think, does get through to some people. It's not eternity, but it's something. It stretches out, and you get a kind of a through a glass darkly glimpse of the continuation of the presence you had on Earth.
A child has no conception of the end of consciousness. This is something that is learned through education and culture.
That's a good point. So then I hope was hoping we could return to CERN and when and that your life and how I'm interested in where you were when you started to feel a pull towards these ideas, what it felt like, and what the impetus was to start moving in this direction.
Look, from birth, I think I have been a philosopher in the sense, and that I know now. I didn't know then because that's all I knew back then. I didn't have a reference to contrast it with. But I always related to life and the world from a philosophical perspective.
Mm,
I always asked myself the big questions.
mm.
I loved to interact with nature. I was blessed to be born in a sort of protected environment in just outside Rio de Janeiro in Brazil,
Oh wow.
which is a very nature-rich area. I haven't been there in 2.5 decades, but I
Oh
still
wow.
have wonderful memories of my early childhood. And I remember relating to that nature in a very philosophical way, the way in which you ask, wow, what is this?
Mm,
Where does this come from? Who am I in relation to this? Where did I come from? Where am I going to go?
yeah.
Those questions were repressed when I went to university. I went to university very early. I had just turned 17.
Oh wow.
And I was busy, 5 years of a master's, and then I landed my first job. I started on a Monday. I had defended my master thesis on a Friday,
Whoa.
and on
That's
Sunday
pretty
I was
packed.
traveling, and on Monday I started at CERN in Switzerland. Yeah, um,
Wow.
and yeah, that's the world's cathedral of high energy physics.
Yeah.
There is no more recognizable institution in the world of
Yeah.
science than CERN,
I
and
even
I
know
found
it.
myself there. Now, 22 years. Oh no, but yeah, just before I completed 23.
Wow.
And then my first day there, my colleagues were telling me, "Oh, see that guy? That's Carlo Rubia. That's Nobel Prize winner." And then they would point me to all the Nobel Prize winners in the canteen during lunch.
Wow.
So it was a big dream. And during those years, I didn't have mind for philosophy. I was learning science. I was doing science. I was working with artificial intelligence, which was a fantastic thing I always wanted to do. I got my first PhD at 26. And then after a while, then those questions began to return, because when you're doing artificial intelligence, you are one turn of the corner away from asking the question, what about artificial consciousness?
Right. Yeah.
Is an intelligent computer a conscious computer? And then those
Yeah.
questions all came back. And that's when my actual philosophical trajectory really began.
Okay. So you're there at CERN. You're in this work, and uh, presumably there was a pretty big shift in your career then, because you're not at CERN now. So I guess it sounds like maybe those the philosophical tendency intensified while you were there. And so what steps did you take? Like,
Yeah, it didn't intensify while I was there. I was there in 96 and 97.
okay.
And there was an enormous sense of mystery at CERN that sort of fulfilled my philosophical needs without I having to address philosophy explicitly.
Okay.
Because you see, when you're working around an accelerator like that, and you're working on building detectors that explore what's happening in the world at the dimensions that you can't even visualize, dimensions in which an atom is the size of the universe compared to what you're trying to study. So my sense of mystery was stimulated every single day. I was in awe of what we were doing there. I thought it was the coolest thing imaginable. I left CERN very pragmatic reason. I'm married, and at CERN, only very, very few people have permanent positions. That's CERN
Hmm.
staff. I had a temporary contract like 99, well, at least 95% of people at CERN.
Okay.
And I married, and I thought, you know what, it's been a great adventure here, but now I want to be stable. I want to be in a place where I have a
Right.
social work and stuff, and have a nice job. And it was the beginning of the first internet bubble.
Hmm.
98 was the beginning of the big bubble of the internet, and companies were hunting us down at CERN.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know, we were
Hot
moods,
commodities. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It was a shooting range, and we were there, and it was a good feeling. And when you're young, and you just married, and you're still ambitious, you don't have a sense for what is really meaningful or not. You're still in that ride, that you go through when you were young, without giving it any second thought, without reflecting about it. You just ride the wave.
Hmm.
So I rode that wave, and I ended up at Philips Research in the Netherlands. And I was doing a project on reconfigurable computing. It was a corporate research project that aimed at making money, but it kept me close to those questions of artificial intelligence, reconfigurable computing. Can I make a computer that reconfigures itself to be conscious? The questions were still there, and I got my first PhD. And it was only after all this that I began to realize that I was not re-examining my basic assumptions, which is that consciousness is something that needs to be created in the first place.
Hmm.
Today, I think better than that. Today, I dare to say, today I know that consciousness is not created. It's that within which all creation happens.
Hmm.
So it's a contradiction in terms to talk about creating consciousness.
Right.
What we might try to create is a dissociated aspect of consciousness that
Abstracted
identifies,
consciousness.
yeah, yeah. So, but that really began in my late 20s, early 30s.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So interesting. And I have noticed in the, like, I've heard from physicists and people in artificial intelligence, there is always that kind of tension. I feel like they're at the evaporating point between science and philosophy. When you're examining these questions, you're on this edge. And you mentioned mystery. Um, Actually, I love that because you were equating um, the sort of, it seemed like you were equating the beauty of philosophical life with mystery, or you were fulfilled in some way at CERN, spiritually. You didn't say spiritually, but yeah, by this mystery, the fact that you were surrounded by mystery. And I think that's really important. um, yeah.
There is no doubt there is a spiritual dimension to a lot of people who work at the frontiers of foundations of physics, high energy physics. There certainly is a spiritual dimension.
Hmm.
If you're strict about what is the spiritual dimension of that and what is the purely theoretical, practical dimension of that, you will realize that nobody can live on the purely theoretical side of that,
Mm.
because it's pure abstraction.
Mm.
There is nothing there. You have to feel that abstract framework in with your imagination. And that, by definition, is a spiritual dimension. When you fill
Mm.
in the mystery using your imagination, when you project that onto what you're doing, that's the spiritual dimension. And most passionate physicists are projecting their own spiritual being
Yeah.
onto and into what they do. They're filling in that bare bones abstract framework of equations and graphs
Yeah.
with that spiritual dimension. That's what gives
Mm.
them energy. This giving, this projection is what comes back to them in the form of energy,
Mm.
spiritual energy, to
Yeah.
be motivated to do what they want to do. Because you see, if you think that we see any subatomic particles at CERN, you don't understand what's going on at CERN. You see
Right.
nothing. When we talk about having found the Higgs boson,
Yeah.
people imagine that, oh, okay,
You're looking in
they
a.
hunted one, they found one, they got it, they saw it, and they sort of
Yeah.
arrested it in some kind of magnetic
There
chamber.
it is.
Yeah, and there it is. That's the Higgs. And no, the Higgs boson, you can't even measure it directly. The Higgs boson is a theoretical abstraction that explains the patterns of clicking in
Mm,
instruments. When the
that's,
instruments click in a certain way, we explain that by inventing this abstract thing we
yeah.
call the Higgs boson.
Oh man, the intuition involved is so inspiring. You know, just the visualization that all these people are doing based on these minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
So
amazing.
if you take the spiritual dimension away, I will tell you the objective truth about what happens there. The Higgs, even if it exists, it lives for too short a time to be measured. It
Yeah.
decays into
Mm,
something else. It's trivial,
right.
electrons, jets, particles that we all know. That then hits a detector and it produces a click in an
Mm,
energy meter, for
right.
instance, the calorimeter, which is the
Yeah.
detector I was working on. I was working on the data acquisition system of the Atlas experiment calorimeter. Lots of funny words
Yeah.
here.
Oh, we've all done
Uh,
that. We've all been there.
um,
Just kidding.
and then that produces a little graph on your computer screen. And the graph goes like this. It's a decaying asymptote.
Yeah.
Asymptote.
And
But
then
if there is a Higgs, it goes like, bloop,
it has a peak. Yeah.
it has a little look, and then you
Yeah.
see that in your computer screen. And then you point at that and say, hey, we found the Higgs, because you run some completely
Yeah.
abstract statistics algorithms.
Yeah.
And you realize that the chance of that being just by chance
Yeah.
is about 1 in a million. So it must be the Higgs. But what's the Higgs? The Higgs
Yeah.
is a theoretical invention. Nobody
Yeah.
sees, nobody touches it. Even if it's true, it's such that it decays before you can measure it. All you see is a graph. So would that motivate anybody from to wake up in the morning and go to work? Of course not. So why are they all there? Why are there 3,000 people at CERN
Yeah.
working day and night like I did? I used to work
Yeah.
until 4 in the morning sometimes, and
Yeah.
I did the so-called night shifts in the accelerator,
Okay.
because when you turn the accelerator on, it's too expensive and takes too long to turn it
Turn it
off and
off
on
and
again.
back
So the
on again.
accelerator is on 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And you always have to have people there in the control room. And nobody wanted to be there between midnight and 4 a.m. except
Yeah.
me. So I swapped shifts with everybody to be in the control room. Why did I do that? Why do they do that? Because of little bumps in a graph on a computer
Yeah.
screen? Because of pure abstraction? No, they do that because they use their imagination to project a whole mysterious spiritual dimension
Yeah.
behind the actual practical objective facts of the matter.
Well, they're living by faith.
Yes,
You know, you're
I don't
living a
mean
life
that in
of
a,
faith.
yes, and look, I don't, yes, and I don't say yes in a demeaning way.
Right.
I think it's a beautiful way to live your life. I think
Yeah.
it's the only way to live life in a way that does justice
Yeah.
to our situation. We are here
Yeah.
bang in the middle of an unfathomable mystery. It's the only way to do justice to our situation
Yeah.
is faith. Faith, not in the sense of dogma,
Right.
faith in the
Dogma
sense
is
of
not
being
faith.
open to the mystery.
Yeah.
That's what faith means. Faith
Yeah.
means to be
Oh,
open to the mystery.
yeah. You're just singing beautiful music to me, and I wonder if this is why. Like, sometimes I'm curious why there would ever be physicists on Joe Rogan. Like, but there's he has a little roster of kind of physicists, and you've got like who come on, and he'll just say like, I read your book, I don't really know what it means, but you know, let's talk. And then he'll talk to them for 3 hours, and I kind of wonder if we're not seeing uh an outflow of this yearning for faith that we just naturally have. And I don't mean religious
Oh,
faith,
you bet.
but these are priests, and I don't say that to demean them at all, but they're high priests of something that actually is giving people that sense of mystery. And what comes to mind, where kind of materialism might then swoop in and kind of kill the, the William Blake poem, he who bindeth to himself a joy doth the winged life destroy. The materialists want to jump in and say mystery is something to be eliminated, that we're actually searching for some kind of final conclusion so we can close this up, so we can lock the door on that control room at CERN and say, all right, and I know I don't think that's the actual experience of these scientists, because I believe scientists are by and large passionate people who are excited about the next question. but there is this, there's this kind of odd veneer of closing off mysteries. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I think most serious, true practicing scientists have a very healthy way to relate to mystery. They know that science, in all likelihood, will never find out the ultimate
Yeah.
truth, nor does it need to.
They must have that.
Yeah, but it's the militants. The militants, look, one profound source of meaning for people who have lost the spiritual dimension of their lives is closure. We know this from, there's a theory in psychology, the name escapes me now.
Oh, the stages of grief?
No,
No.
it's,
Oh, sorry.
anyway, but closure is an alternative source of meaning. When you've lost relationship with the mystery, when you lost relationship with higher forms of meaning, to get closure is a sort of a bad replacement for that. Like if you're disappointed in life because your life went all wrong and there is no coming back, you cannot recover time lost and it's all piece of crap anyway, you have no meaning. But if you at least understand how it happened, then there is some source of meaning. If you lost your son to war,
Yeah.
that's a tragedy because you lost your continuity in the world. Your offspring is supposed to give continuity to you after you die. You lost that. But if you at least know the circumstances under which your son has died,
Right.
if his body has returned home and can be buried and given the correct rituals, the proper rites, then there is closure.
Right.
You see, this sense of closure is a compensation. There's a fluid compensation, and in science, it is the specter, the illusion of the final model, the ultimate theory of everything that carries with it this idea that, hey, it's all a piece of crap, but that's the ultimate closure. At least we have closure.
Yeah.
See,
Wow.
we are nothing in this universe. We don't matter. Our lives will be forgotten after 1,000 years. It would be as if we didn't exist at all. But at least we understand what's going on down to the ultimate detail. So this is psychological. It's fluid compensation.
That's
it's what
beautiful.
the militants hold on to. It's that sense of meaning, and that sense of meaning gets heightened if they can convince themselves that not only have they achieved closure, they are a unique elite club that has managed to achieve that closure, and they differentiate themselves from the masses. That's yet another boost to meaning. So that's why militants act that way, as priests in a bad sense, while true scientists, they are there bang in the middle of the mystery every day, feeding the spiritual dimension of that mystery through their imagination, through populating the empty contours of abstraction with the living mystery that resides within them, and which they project onto what they are doing. And that's the real thing. That's the real mystery. So from that sense, I would say true scientists are spiritual in the positive sense. But neo-atheist militants, they are just trying to find meaning for themselves at your expense and the expense of the average person on the street by this kind of pathological fluid compensation.
Oh man, this is great. And I feel like there's a lot of really practical stuff in here, like just framing closure in the death of a loved one and comparing it to this false sense of closure in scientific discovery. That's really profound, Bernardo. I love that. And sorry, I interrupted you.
It's right under our noses, and it's right there to be seen.
Yeah, I love it. And I think that it's this idea of mystery. I've heard a lot of people talk to you. I've watched a lot of interviews. I have a desk job. So I've been just like the deep Bernardo Kastrup YouTube dive. And a lot of people, myself included, when they hear your thoughts, immediately are drawn to the idea that, oh my goodness, in this non-religious guy, because I think you've been a little more spiritual sounding in this interview than in a lot of the ones I've heard. I mean, it all depends on the questions you're asking, all of that. But you're not a super religious, Bible thumping. Like, I don't really hear you quote the scriptures or anything like that. But people are very
I can, but yeah.
well, of course, of course. Yeah, I'm not trying to limit you. I'm just saying, like, but the people who are talking to you, sometimes I see the light go on and they go, oh my goodness, this philosophical theory leaves the door open for God, for the existence of God. And that's near and dear to my heart, because I've started to have this sense that the open door to God is better than the proof of God. You know what I mean? Like that apologists and those kinds of things for religions are, the winged life destroy. Like they are holding down. It's almost like they're finding the fawn in the forest and tackling it to the ground and holding it up and see, look, it's here, and then and there's something about it that takes away the life of God. And I guess I just wonder if that means anything to you, like what your own thoughts are on God, because yeah, the mystery, removing the mystery of God, I think is one of the things that maybe has killed the soul of religion in a large way.
I'm usually careful using the word God because I think
Yeah,
there are 7.5 billion definitions of
of
it on
course.
this planet, if you know what I mean. So if I use the word, each person will hear a different thing. So it's tricky. But if I stick to the fundamentals, God as something omniscient, omnipresent, it's everywhere, and omnipotent, not in the sense that he's a despot, but in the sense that he's behind the causal chains of nature. That he, she, it is the impetus behind the unfolding of nature according to causal chains whose regularities we can model according to scientific equations.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what we are talking about, this broad, relatively vague definition of God, I think the human intuition about the existence of God is overwhelming. It has been there throughout history.
Yeah.
Could all this be just a collective hallucination? Man, of course not. I mean, it's so widespread. People are sensing, not through their conceptual thinking, but through the intuitive roots of their being, that they are related to a omnipresent mystery that has a direct influence, or maybe is even the essence of everything that happens. And I take this kind of extremely widespread intuition seriously, because it's telling me that there is a sense in the human being that's not conceptual thinking, but there is a sense that's part of us, has always been part of us, some kind of root system in the human being that connects us to some primordial reality at the basis of everything. And we've come up with this word for it. We call it God. Right. And once it comes up to our conceptual thinking, then we produce millions or billions of definitions for it. And then we go to war against each other because his definition is different from mine. And then the whole thing goes to hell. But the primary intuition, before you dress it with a conceptual narrative, that primary intuition, I take very seriously. I would go as far as to say that this is a slam dunk, is one of the most self-evident aspects of reality, is that there is that going on. Look, I was not educated to be religious. I was not educated to be an atheist either. I had, and I'm going to use the word liberal in the European sense. In the US, it's a tainted word now, and I don't mean by it what most people will think of it in the US. But I had an open education. My mother was Catholic, a practicing Catholic, and I was exposed to that. My father was very much a scientist, even though he was an architect by practice. He consumed science all the time. So I was exposed to scientific thinking. He did his little experiments at home. I was exposed to all that. Neither tried to indoctrinate me. Neither made me feel like I didn't have the freedom to choose. Neither tried to overwhelm my own proclivities and dispositions. So the times I went to church with my mother were the times that I woke up in the morning and I told her, out of my own spontaneous free will, I'd like to go to church with you today. Then I would go. If I wouldn't say anything, I wouldn't go. And that would be the end of it. So I don't have an axe to grind either way, if you know what I mean. So I'm certainly pro-science, and I've written a book that is pro-religion, not
Right.
pro-dogmatism, not
Right.
pro-fundamentalism. I think fundamentalism is as much a disservice to religion as atheism, if
Yeah.
not worse.
Yeah.
But I'm
I think it's a
certainly,
type of atheism, to be perfectly honest. It feels, having been from that background, it feels like a type of atheism. It feels like putting putting the corpse of God in a glass case. Uh, you know what I mean?
yeah,
And maybe Nietzsche was getting at that. But
yeah,
yeah,
to reduce the mystery, to reduce God to a few moral rules, it's, it's, it's to flatten God to
yeah,
a point that it's not even a caricature. I mean, I think it's a
yeah.
disservice to our religious intuitions to adopt a dogmatist view of it. But anyway.
You would like Mark Vernon's book, A Secret History of Christianity, because it's really like it does a really succinct job. It's a short read of situating Christ right at the nexus of kind of a natural evolution of human consciousness, kind of framing it within where thought had been, and then kind of the type of individualism that was percolating in the kind of in the collective unconscious, and then kind of crystallized through the stories of Christ and the life of Christ. So anyway, you would probably like that. And yeah, this is just also great. I do feel like there is, maybe this is just me, but it feels like there is um, a spirit of this kind of agnostic spiritualism or something that man, I don't want to put a label on what you're saying, but the things you're saying are all so much things that have been percolating in my own mind. And then I'm hearing more and more people say it. There's kind of these people coming online, you know, like, I mean, Rupert Sheldrake, and you've probably heard of him, and the guy called John Vervaeke. Do you know John Vervaeke?
No, Rupert, I know.
Yeah, you know Rupert personally?
Yeah, yeah.
He's okay. Yeah, tell him to come on my show because he's told me no twice, but that's okay. Anyway,
Really?
yeah,
Oh,
I mean, very kindly. He's just so unbelievably busy, and there's a million freaking podcasts these days. I have nothing against him, but man, would I ever hug that guy? But anyway, there's just this thing in the collective unconscious that seems to be moving in this direction. We have a sense of need, and there's a pragmatism to the way that you're going about it. That's really I really appreciate it. There's an openness, and yet it's an openness without vagueness. You know what I mean? Like you're actually attempting to answer questions and actually have answers to them. But your theory of things does not take the mystery away, because obviously, to say that this cup is a product of consciousness, I could sit and think all day about that. And I don't even think that you think, you know, in a decade, you're going to be able to tell me exactly how this cup is a product of consciousness. You know what I mean? Like you have a framework. I mean, I don't mean that in an insulting way. I mean, there's mystery
uh,
inherent.
yeah. The cup is a product of consciousness, but not of your consciousness alone.
Right.
That's the point. So there
Yeah.
is something mysterious out there that is playing an important role in having this cup exist and to be experienced by your consciousness.
Yeah. This is going to be strange, but I wonder if I could read a poem, a very, very old poem that this morning, I kind of have some things I reflect on before I do an interview sometimes.
Lovely.
And it's,
I read poetry, by the way.
yeah, I fully, yeah, would expect you to actually. So have you ever heard one called the Gayatri?
By whom?
It's just ancient. I don't even know if its author is known. So it's a
No, I
translation.
don't.
It was in a Kate Bush song called Lily. So that's where I first heard it. But and then I had to look it up because there's music over it and I couldn't quite hear it. So anyway, it seems to actually say something about what you're doing, and it's ancient. Like I say, like it's almost authorless, and it says, I'll read it. It's not long. It says, "O thou who givest sustenance to the universe, from whom all things proceed, to whom all things return, unveil to us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by a disk of golden light, that we may know the truth and do our whole duty as we journey to thy sacred feet." And there's something about when I first read that, and I admit I'm kind of the typical social media, like staring at my phone too much, skimming things, superficially kind of absorbing things. And when I read that that unveiled to us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by a disk of golden light, that's stopped me. Like it stopped me in my tracks. And that doesn't happen with poetry. Honestly, I sometimes worry that I'm dead inside or something. And then I read this, and so I guess, do you have any kind of, does that seem to resonate with what you're saying? Like the true
Absolutely.
spiritual sun hidden by a disk of golden light.
The mystery can only be spoken of in symbolic language, the language of it's more than metaphor, but we could speak of it in terms of a metaphor, because the real truth of it, we don't have words for it. A language has evolved for pragmatic reasons, to tell each other where the predator lies hidden, where the good fruit is to be found. That's what language evolved for, not to talk about these things. I think the tragedy of our situation in the West, at least, although the Western culture is now permeating the entire world, but the tragedy of our situation as Westerners today is that because we are still human beings and we still have our roots connected to the primordial truth from which we derive our very vital energy, when we read something like this, or when we hear something like this, we recognize it. Emphasis in the word recognition. It's not like we learn or we have a new insight. No, it's not that. It's recognition. It's the words that point to ourselves, something we already knew in the guts of our being, because we are in contact with that all the time. If we were not, we would just blink out of existence. So we still have that recognition because we are human beings, but because we are Westerners, it has become a cultural maxim in our society today that if you honor that intuition, then you're stupid.
Right.
That's our tragedy.
It's data.
That's the tragedy. Yeah.
It's data to be analyzed. Yeah, that's so interesting. That's an epistemological, our epistemology is so toxic, I think.
Our culture, when it comes to metaphysics, has become toxic for reasons that can be historically traced and even comprehended.
And even related to. Yeah, even relatable.
I agree, even related to, but it doesn't change the fact that today we are putting ourselves in a condition of tension that it's hardly bearable to exist, and that's why the pharmacology industry producing drugs to allow us to bear the situation is booming. That's why we have an epidemics of depression and anxiety. It's our situation.
Further to what you're saying about recognizing, and that's really important. We recognize things. I also think that it's possible for artists to more. Oh, a kitty. That's fine. You don't have to scare the kitty away.
When he wants attention.
Yeah, I've got two kids who are I'm trying to get them to watch shows while I do this, so they may end up showing their faces. But anyway. So I think it's one of the beautiful things about art is that an artist can also be almost like archaeology of things they already know, or of things that we as a species already know. When if you were to write a line like that of poetry that was recognized by others, I don't think that you could say you fully created that from nothing. You know what I mean? Because if I'm making something, and this works very well in your theory, if I'm making something that someone else intuitively recognizes as something they already knew, then how can I take credit as though I big banged that shit from nothing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, nothing is being discovered. There is nothing truly new. What is new is the metacognitive recognition of that we already knew, but we didn't know that we knew. Do you understand what I'm trying to hint at?
Yeah.
There is a level on which we know it because we are that consciousness at the root of everything. Manifesting itself as us and others and the world at large. So there is a sense in which everything that there is to be is known through direct acquaintance through experience. But to have an experience falls short of to know that you have the experience. This
Mm.
metacognitive step
Yeah.
in which you sort of realize your own knowledge at a higher level of
Right.
cognition. I think that's the role of life. That's the meaning of life. I would go
Yeah.
as far as to say that that's the meaning of life. We are, to speak religious language, which I am allowing myself to do with you, given all these
Yeah.
disclaimers and caveats that I said
Yeah.
in the beginning.
Safe space.
We might be the instruments through which God attains metacognitive awareness of what
Mm.
he, she, it has known all along.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
only through us, that realization of, oh, I actually now know that I know this.
Right.
That is something that happens through the struggles of life, and suffering is a big instrument of that. If there were no suffering, we would live Epicurean lives. We'd be having
Yeah.
fun and never give thoughts to the deep questions.
I sometimes wonder if even that makes things deeper. The fact that our decisions are more realizations than decisions. Like when I think about the deciding to ask my wife to marry me, um, I had to say, and it was one of my first realizations, is that I couldn't frame it as a decision. I realized that it was what I wanted, or was the path that that lit up for me, and rather than taking away, I mean, yes, I guess it takes away a little bit of personal agency in that decision, in a way, but in that particular context, I think we can see the resonance of the importance of that, right? Because I don't think anybody likes to think that a list of pros and cons was sort of tabulated, and then a decision was made.
I'm totally with you there. I think I may use my personal agency to decide which mortgage package I would take,
Yeah.
or I may use my personal agency to decide which way I would take to work today, given the traffic situation.
Yeah.
But my whole life has not been decided by me as a personal agent, and that's something you only realize later on in hindsight.
Yeah.
I can trace back now the key junctures of my life, the key choices and decisions, and I can tell you with my hand in my heart, in absolute honesty, I had nothing to do with that.
Wow.
Me as an individual
Yeah.
narrative in my head, me as an ego, an
Yeah.
agent separate from whatever it is that's manifesting itself
Yeah.
through me, decided very little. And I think the key struggle of life is, do you surrender to that?
Right.
Will you let it happen through
Yeah.
you with faith?
Yeah.
And what's faith in the sense? It's trust in the mystery. Trust it.
Oh my
Trust
goodness.
the mystery. Or will you oppose it and you
Yeah.
will fight against it? And then life is a living nightmare. I have made, I mean, every important decision in my life. I have left a career of 25 years 3 months ago. A career in which I knew how to make a buckload of money with one hand tied behind my back and a finger inside my nose, as they say in the Netherlands, 2 fingers in your nose, in which I felt absolutely comfortable, safe, a world, I used to work in high technology strategy, a world in which everybody knew me by name. And I left that. Was it the decision of my personal agency? No, my personal agency resisted that for 5 years. Until we got to a point where the suffering was so great that I thought, okay, let's go again. Let whatever it is that wants to manifest in the world through me have free reign, because ultimately I think free will in the sense of my free will as an individual agent, I think that's a red herring. But whatever truth there is to it, I think it boils down to this. Do you choose to resist, or do you choose to go along with that more primary principle that flows through you, which ultimately you are? So I wouldn't portray this as being a slave to that, although, in the Socratean terminology, you have a daimon, which is not you, but needs you to do his bidding. And then there is a sort of sounds like a slave-master relationship.
No, I get it.
You could look at it that way, but I prefer to look at it as my sense of personal identity is a hallucination. It's a mistaken narrative. What I really am is that thing that has no fear, knows exactly what he needs to do, what needs to be accomplished in the world through his
mm,
action or with the help of his action, has no personal agenda whatsoever, is
mm,
not the least interested in personal gain, fortune, success, none of that. He has a mission and he's out to do that. My individual free will, I boil down to this. Do I allow him to operate through me, or do I resist? If I
mm,
resist, he will win at the end
mm.
anyway, or not. But then I know
Yeah,
I
you
will
can
burn up.
you're delaying the work, or you're creating unnecessary. I remember when I was trying to live a life of the faith I was given. I remember a general sense, and it was only in the last 5 years that this began to clear, a general sense of confusion that went far beyond uh, thoughts of faith or the Bible or God. It was a general sense of confusion and fogginess. I feel there was a point, and I hate to say this because it sounds like I really don't like anyone claiming, enlightenment or to be I am now non-dual. What? Oh,
And
you've crossed
I also
the
have a,
border over into being non-dual. That's so unbelievably dual. But
I also
anyway,
don't like that. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm not saying that, but there was a moment where I think I heard something and listened to it and started to move, and it's the clarity that comes even in fits and starts.
Yeah.
It's something to appreciate, and I'm very pleased for you and happy for you that you did that. So congratulations on leaving your
It's
job.
look, it's an ongoing process. Leaving my job is one thing. There have been many other things
Mm,
throughout the course of my life that have brought me to where I am. None of them was my deliberate egoic
mm,
decision.
yeah,
Um, what I wanted to say, it's a continuous surrendering. That's how it feels to me. And it's not like you arrive at some point and then, okay, now you're enlightened. For me, it's a cycle. Pressure builds up. Eventually you surrender to that which wants to manifest in the world through you. You surrender to that despite all of your fears, insecurities, anxieties, all that, you surrender to that. And then it happens. And then you start trying to reassert your egoic anxieties and
yeah,
volition, and then the cycle repeats. There has to be a new surrender every
yeah,
few years. There's a
yeah,
new surrender. When I look back to the the footprints that I left behind me, it has been this cycle of
mm,
continuous surrendering. And you know, we were talking about militant the self-appointed militant spokespeople of science achieving meaning through this sense of closure, in which I don't, they lost the mystery, they lost the true meaning, but at least they think, they hallucinate a sense of closure. The same thing happens in religion. That's when it becomes dogmatic, because the dogmatists or the fundamentalists in religion, they think they've solved the mystery. They think
mm,
they have all the answers. It's there is a code, you have to live literally by it,
yeah,
and that's it. That's all there
yeah,
is to it. I mean, this is the same reaction against meaninglessness and insecurity that you see in science. Why? Because we are all human beings. We are all playing up humanness in
yeah.
different ways.
Oh,
So for the dogmatic fundamentalist, the sense of closure has come to replace that more open but uncertain, difficult, anxiety-ridden
yeah,
relationship with the mystery.
yeah,
And that relationship is necessarily anxiety-ridden for the ego,
yeah,
because the ego is facing something that's so much bigger and more powerful
yeah.
that you can never have a sense that you're in control.
I
You
have,
cannot have that. So if you need that, you have to flatten the mystery into a cartoon,
yeah,
and then tell yourself, now I have closure. Now I know how to live and not to live, so I
yeah,
end up in heaven, not in hell.
yeah.
And there you go. It's the
Yeah.
same story.
It's so good. I have some thoughts. One of them that just came to mind is that actually the Muslim practice of um, not drawing God, or not drawing Allah, or is kind of neat in that way. Actually, it kind of has a new resonance in the light of what you're saying here. That was one thing that came to mind. And then the other thing is just how what you're describing is kind of a redemption of determinism, because I think one of the reasons that determinism is this bee in the bonnet of a lot of people, the sense that we have no free will, no choice, is that there is a part of it that we kind of intuit is true, and it bothers us to no end, because we really, like, we get such a sense of purpose from the agency and the decisions that we've made, and the narrative that's been created of our lives. And what you're describing is kind of this beautiful, open-handed, like, faith-based, not in a religious sense, um, version of determinism, in which life is this beautiful collaboration. And then there's this sense, and I'm absolutely positive you've had this feeling before, and I've had it a few times. I've been fortunate enough. I try to stop and mark it in my mind, is that when things start to feel up in the air again, when things in life start to feel undefined, undetermined, there's the anxiety, and then right behind it, there's this little sense of anticipation, almost like when you're rounding the top of a roller coaster, and so you can hang on to that and say you're actually now looking forward to whatever's beyond this disillusion that is a natural part of the cycles of life. Does that?
Well, I'll confess to you, I never look forward to the next surrender. It's always a very difficult process.
Right.
It imbues my life
Okay.
with meaning, because now I can look back and think, wow, I'm so happy all that has happened. Not because of me, but despite me.
Yeah.
That either that force was stronger than me and I lost the fight, or that I surrendered it and then suffered a little less for the same result. So it imbues my life with meaning, but I never look forward to the next round. Every round is dreadfully painful. The level of anxiety and insecurity that comes with it can be mind-boggling sometimes. But I don't want to overemphasize. I have a relatively easy life compared to others. So I don't really look
we're
forward
talking
to
about
that,
your
but
own experience. Yeah, we're not talking. Yeah, you're not making it this objective.
No, it's just about me.
Yeah.
But I think the word determinism has gotten a very bad press, because there is something dreadful that we associate with the word determinism, but it's not really determinism. What is dreadful there, what is flattening, confining, and claustrophobic, is mechanicism, not determinism. Every choice I make, whether it's egoic or through my daimon, whatever, it is determined by a will. It is determined by a preference, by an emotion, by a sense of mission, by a sense of responsibility, by a sense of moral. It is determined, but it's not mechanic. There is feeling coursing through that determination. If you say that determinism is untrue, then what you're saying is that everything is random. And randomness is also claustrophobic. Everything is meaningless. It could be anything else. There is no point to anything. And that's not what we mean when we say we don't like determinism. So what we don't like is mechanicism, or when choices are made through mechanical rules, like billiard balls on a billiard table. But determinism is not confined to mechanicism. Determinism, it means that what happens is determined by something, and that something can be a will, can be a sense of purpose, can be a cosmic telos, can be a preference, can be a desire, can be a fear, and it can be anything.
And if, sorry, go ahead.
Determinism has gotten an unfair bad press, I think, because what people mean by it is mechanicism. And that it's fair enough to say that mechanicism, it's a very flattened, one-dimensional view of reality.
Right. Well, I can definitely say that a big part of my personal journey has been releasing that sense of having hewn myself from stone. I don't want to think I'm an amoeba or jelly on the floor, but at least releasing that notion has been important for me, and clearly for you as well.
But for me, if you ask me, am I a mechanicist? Absolutely not. But do I think that the happenings in my life have been determined as opposed to random? Absolutely. Absolutely. And they have not been determined by my personal self. As I told you, my whole life has been this cyclic fight against fate, so to say. But that force that I every now and then have to surrender to is not random. That force and I feel it because it's coursing through me. As it courses through me, I make direct acquaintance with it. It's
mm,
not me, but I make direct acquaintance with it
mm,
because it's flowing through me. And, and that acquaintance informs me that that force has a tremendous sense of purpose.
mm,
Not choosing randomly. It
mm,
is choosing not metacognitively, but very precisely according to a telos,
mm.
according to a goal. It
Yeah,
has a very precise sense of a direction
yeah.
of what must happen next. So
Mm,
it is determined, and it's not determined by my personal self,
mm,
but it isn't random. It's
mm.
meaningful.
Yeah.
It's imbued with meaning,
Mm,
and you can get acquainted with that meaning flowing through you even in the most painful moments of your life,
yeah.
perhaps particularly in those.
I
And
had
from
a,
that sense, that's a great thing in Christianity. Huh? That it can be looked at with bad eyes or good eyes. With bad eyes, you would say Christianity has reified pain and suffering and inferiority. That's Nietzsche's perspective, that
mm,
Christianity is against life because it sort of reifies weakness. Uh,
mm,
um, but you could shed a different light on that same thing and say Christianity makes clear the meaning imbued in suffering. And
mm,
it makes clear that even when you're not on top, even when you are below, even when you're lost, even when you're being stepped upon, even when uh, I'm going to use this word metaphorically, even when the devil is washing the floor
right.
with you, there is meaning in that. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the big things in Christianity. In Islam, there is another big thing, equally fantastic, equally important. Even the name Islam means surrender.
Mm,
And what does a true devout Muslim do? He surrenders to God 5 times a day. He
mm,
surrenders to the higher power that's trying to enter the world through him, that's trying to manifest in the world, in the world through him. He
mm.
surrenders his own egoic
Yeah.
preferences and petty wishes and fears. He surrenders to
Mm,
that bigger thing, which has a purpose,
yeah.
5 times a day. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. I take my
That's so
hat off
good.
to that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had a Muslim guy on the show from a channel called Rational Religion. Another you'd probably really enjoy talking to them as well. Philosophical Muslim guys, really great. But as you're saying that, a story came to my mind. You said the devil washing the floor with you, and I had an experience. I mean, I'll be vulnerable for a minute. I had an experience where I exploded in anger at my children, one of my children, and the pain, like the internal suffering that comes from expressing anger towards a child. I didn't punch him or anything, but I was really clearly angry and kind of scared him, and then I went away, and I was rolling on, you said the devil washing the floor with you. I was rolling on the floor in my home in anguish. Like, this doesn't happen to me a lot. And in that moment, um this uh, this separate view of myself, not literally, but in my mind, another little voice came in and said, "This is, you will learn from this. This is something, this suffering, take this with you and let it shape you," kind of thing. I mean, it probably wasn't as profound as that, but I saw me there, and I had sympathy for me, but not sympathy in an excusing way. Just like, oh, look at that guy on the floor, look at that guy weeping on the floor, and I think that's kind of, I don't know. I mean, the story came as you were speaking, so I don't have a really profound way to directly link it to what you were saying, other than that
I
it's this
can
consciousness viewing consciousness, and it's the suffering, the meaning of suffering, and when suffering has meaning, I wouldn't take any of that suffering away now. I wouldn't go back and erase it. Yeah.
I can relate completely with that. It has been with me most of my life. This dissociation that you describe, the you who suffers and the you who is outside observing the suffering, and in a much more, there's this Dutch word, overzichtelijk, with much more perspective than the one
Overview.
suffering. And
Yeah.
yeah, this separate part of you who has the context. and who knows how to pass a value judgment to that suffering, given that much broader context. I mean, the first time I experienced it, it was very visceral. I was very close to my father as a kid, and my father died when I was 12 years old, and I was not close to my mother at all. So for me, that's like your world is over. It's like somebody pulled the solid ground from underneath your feet and you're in free fall.
I can't
And
imagine.
in those throes of absolute despair, I had these two, the one suffering and the one outside observing, with an awareness of where I was at that moment in a broader context, where things were going, why they were like that, why that happened, what that would lead to, but a much, much broader context, not a year or two later. No, I'm talking about a much broader context. And that has been palpable to me my whole life, this second self. I call him the diamond. Jung called him personality number two. Everybody can relate to that.
Yeah, I call it the observer, but that's just me.
The observer has context, so he is not purely an observer. That's what I sense, because
Fair
he's
enough.
flowing through me, so I am acquainted with his inner life as well, although he's not really me, Bernardo Kastrup. The most recent, I don't have any problem making myself vulnerable, by the way. It's been a few years since I had a problem with that.
Oh, good.
The most recent moment for me was beginning of last year, so almost 2 years ago, when I had an accident. I was already suffering from tinnitus for 7 years, this buzzing in the ears. So for 7 years, I already had that because of an ear infection I had years ago. But it was not extreme. I was on the average. And then I had an accident with my alarm system. It went off in front of my face for 10 seconds before I could pull the yank the batteries out. And that left me with extreme tinnitus. I constantly hear, a dentist's drill when you're doing dental work. So I have one in each ear, like 3 meters distance, day and night, 24 hours a day. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Yeah, it's a little better now, but yeah, I live with it both ears. When I put the headset on to do an interview, I hear it a lot, because then you close the outside sounds that distract you. But when that accident happened and I realized what tinnitus could be, and I went to my doctor, and my doctor told me, there is nothing we can do about it. It will not kill you, but we cannot do anything about it. The only thing we do is they have a psychological treatment to allow you to accept it, to sort of make peace with it. But life becomes constant torture. It's the last thing you hear before you fall asleep. It's the first thing you hear when you wake up. And it doesn't matter whether you're okay or whether you are having all kinds of problems, and the last thing you need is 2 dentist drills inside your head. It's still there. It's not even Chinese torture, because it's much worse than Chinese torture.
Like the water torture.
Yeah, it's much worse than water torture, because 10 seconds of it would already make you go like, oh, stop it, because that's how I felt in the beginning. Now it's part of my life. I've been living with it for almost 2 years. But I had basically decided to commit suicide twice early last year. For a period of half an hour, twice. I thought, no, I wrote my books, I lived my life, I lived many lives, and I don't need this. I just don't need this. I don't feel like, and I'm an idealist. I'm pretty convinced my consciousness will not end, even though my personal agency will. So I'm like, no, how much worse can it be? Cannot be worse than this, right?
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to laugh. I don't know why my response was to laugh. I'm very much with you on this story.
I laugh of myself.
Okay.
But these are moments that change you forever, because you know that at that moment, you were ready to give up on everything. So everything becomes relative after that. When you think, well, I'm not going to make this decision because I have something to lose. And you go like, oh, I was totally ready to lose everything not so long ago, twice.
Oh, interesting.
Twice. And I am a scientist. I would know pretty well how to kill myself painlessly and very quickly.
You're a researcher. You'd figure it out.
I know. I'm not going to tell.
Okay, no.
I know.
Yeah.
So it changes your life. And I can tell you now, in hindsight, had that not happened, had not that maelstrom of suffering, which nobody else can relate to, because nobody can hear what you're hearing. So
Right.
for the rest of the world, you have a great life. You live in a beautiful house. You have a
Yeah.
beautiful girlfriend, 3 cats, money in the bank. So people are like, what are you talking about? They can't hear the torture
Yeah.
you are going
Right.
through day and night, and you can't pull the
Yeah.
plug. I mean, you can, but you pull the plug only once, and you
Yeah.
can't plug it back in. Um,
Yeah.
if it were not for that experience, having weakened my sense of personal agency so much, I would not have left my job and started
Mm.
Essentia Foundation.
Hmm.
And the Essentia Foundation has hardly started. We will go public in January next year. But there is this other guy observing it all since the day I had that accident. And the accident was my own stupidity. I yanked a siren out of the wall, knowing full well that it had a safety feature, that
Mm.
I had to go to the computer first. But I thought I would just yank
Oh,
it out and pull the batteries. No, it takes a while to pull the batteries. So I did that. Something in me did that. And it was not my ego self. It was not my personal self, because my personal self wanted to end it all after that. So
yeah.
why would I want to put myself through that kind of suffering? But something in me did. And it did. You might think, well, I'm overinterpreting this. Maybe, but that's how I sincerely relate to it.
Mhm.
That part of me did it because that part of me knew if I wouldn't be weakened to that extent, to let go of my perceived sense of security, to my perceived sense of identity after 25 years in the high-tech world, corporate world, uh, I wouldn't do what I just did.
Mm.
I wouldn't just leave all that behind and start a
That's,
completely new life in
yeah.
a completely different direction.
Right.
And that guy, that neutral guy that you described,
Yeah.
although Essentia has just started, he seems to know Essentia will be a good thing,
Mm.
a big thing.
Yeah.
Um, and for him, it won't be. For him, it already is in another level. It
Right. Yeah.
already is.
Oh,
Do,
that's
do
neat.
you know what I mean? Yeah. And
Yeah.
amazingly enough, my tinnitus is a lot better. I
Huh.
hear it, and then
Yeah.
my doctor says, "Well, it's not better. It's just that you're used to it, so your brain sort of
Right.
filters
Sure.
it." Maybe, but it's the same
Yeah.
doctor who told me, "Well, in the Netherlands, tinnitus at this level is legal reason for you to get assisted suicide if you
Oh
want."
my
And I
goodness.
remember thinking, I don't need it. I know pretty well how to do it.
Oh, yeah.
uh, but it's the same guy who gives
Wow.
you no hope.
Wow.
Um, and now I am pretty convinced it's much better now. It's tolerable. There
Mm.
are days
Yeah.
I don't think about it until I go to bed.
Well, it's all about your experience of it, right? So even if it's not, I mean, even if objectively it's the same, it doesn't matter if you're suffering less because of it or something, but
Yeah,
maybe it is
yeah.
less.
And in
Um,
conclusion, if you ask me, is all this because of my free will? Of course not. My free will would be such that I would never have
yeah.
done that to myself. If I had it my way, I would still be making my money with one arm tied behind my bed, doing something I had my back,
Yeah.
doing something I had a lot of fun with, which
Wow.
is technology strategy, in absolute security, and going on
Mm.
holidays 3 times a year to some beautiful destination. That's what I would be doing, man. But no, that's not how my life is lived. I don't have the free will to decide where my life's going. What I do have free will for is to be in peace with it, to
Mm.
accept it and say, fine, may your will be done, not mine.
Wow. Okay. That is so, I mean, I just love all of this so much, and I could go on forever, but I like to, sometimes I feel that a conversation has reached kind of a great jumping
Climate.
off, a great jumping off point. And so, I mean, I celebrate that you've gone through these experiences. I celebrate your new thing. What do you call it?
Essentia Foundation.
Essentia.
It's a philosophy foundation. We will be
Mm.
promoting some very well substantiated and grounded ideas in philosophy,
Mm.
neuroscience of consciousness, and foundations of physics, but ideas that are hardly reaching the wider public. So we want to play a role there.
Man, yeah, that sounds so good. I mean, I would that sounds like something I would uh, absolutely love to be involved in. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on that.
I'll let you know then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's selfishly, I would just that's the kind of one of the things I was planning to ask you, but I'm not going to now. Is kind of how we get from philosophical conversations to kind of change, actually helping people with some of this stuff, not divorced from reality. And I think you have a lot of conversations with people, such as myself, which you're so gracious to do, because it clearly takes a lot of your time. And I think these are important, and especially the way that you're capable of sharing yourself in those, like really sharing yourself. It's not an academic thing.
No, philosophy for me is lived.
It has to be. And I think it's been too academic for too long. So I celebrate you. I've loved this conversation, and I think we'll end it there. And thank you so much, Bernardo, for being on.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's been a lot of fun. I didn't even see the time pass.
Yeah, this is one of the longer episodes, and yeah, it just, yeah. Well, maybe someday we can speak again. I would love to. Sure. I would love to do that. This has been unbelievably inspiring, and I would also want to say that the things you have said have been a perfect encapsulation of where I would hope that the idea of faith will go, where I would hope that the idea of God will go, and you're living it and showing it. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Take care.